Hey guys, today we're going over tuning basics and how to tune your print to get the perfect part every single time. The next setting we're going to go over is supports and support settings. Now this is really critical if you have complex geometries where there's a part comes up and goes over here, but there's nothing underneath it attaching it to this part. So the key to supports is that the printer can't generally print in mid-air, so you have to give it a surface to print on top of. So this is what we call supports, where basically it's sacrificial material that just builds up until the point where the part begins, that flat spot or bridging or something of that nature, and it supports that material. Now, the most important part of supports is your interface layers. Depending on your layer height, this is going to change. At point 1, you might want to leave 2 separation layers. At point 2, usually 1 separation layer is good enough. And again, this changes based on the material. If we're printing PEEK versus printing PLA, we need different settings for the PEEK because it's going to fuse together. It's 400 Celsius, and the PLA generally is easy to remove, and you're only down at the normal 200 Celsius temperatures. So the settings are going to change per material. So a separation layer is basically, it's going to build up the supports and then it's going to stop. And then your part is going to print another layer, and then it's not going to print over here. But then on the next layer, it's going to start printing on top of the support. So that's one layer where there's no material, and it allows the supports to cool enough to where the next layer on top doesn't bond to it as well, but it still should lay flat. So there's a lot of settings involved with that and getting that dialed in based on each material. But usually the automatic setting in your slicer is going to work just fine, especially for basic materials like PLA, ABS. Now, sometimes your slicer is going to place supports where they can't be easily removed. Like if you're printing something that's hollow and you have supports everywhere, it's going to try to put supports inside that hollow object. And unless you have a big cavity or if it unscrews or something like that, you're not going to be able to get those supports out. What you want to do, there's a setting in most slicers that lets you build supports from the build plate or everywhere. So from the build plate only is basically going to keep everything on the outside. It's not going to print anything where you can't get it out. If you want to get a little more advanced with this, you can actually download Simplify 3D, and that allows you to place supports wherever you want. You fully customize it, works really great. We like using that when we need custom supports. So the best way is always to design your part or find a part that doesn't require supports, because support can be hard to remove, it's a waste of material, it adds time to the print, it's just, if you can avoid it, awesome. And there's a lot of different ways to avoid it. The best way is always going to be avoiding supports entirely. And there's a lot of advanced techniques that we use to do that and to help our clients create a part that's going to print well and still work in the geometry that they need. But for beginners, and if you're printing in PLA, you should be fine just with the automatic settings. Now, this is really something to take into account, because if you're printing a large part and you have it oriented on the bed in a way that's going to make it use a lot of support material, it's going to just basically, you might end up printing more support than your actual part. And there could be an easy way to reorient that part, just as is with no modification, to use less supports. So avoiding supports or using as little supports as possible is generally the best way to go. When you get really good at it and you've tuned it in and you're really familiar with your material, then you can actually sometimes get away with things that you couldn't before. You can tune in special cooling or special temperatures to allow it to print these other features without supports. There's also advanced printers on the market that use dual extrusion. So they have 2 different nozzles extruding 2 different materials. And this one will be the normal material, and then this one will be your soluble support, whether it's water-soluble PVA or if it's something like HIPS where you dissolve it in solutions and chemicals. But it's printing 2 different materials at the same time. So this actually allows you to print impossible objects. You could print a sphere within a sphere within a sphere, and just throw that into the solution, let it sit for however long until it all dissolves away, and then you've got your impossible object. For the high temperature materials like PEEK and PEI, there's no really good soluble support on the market yet, so generally we just use PEEK supports for PEEK parts. If you're a beginner and you're thinking about getting the soluble supports, I don't recommend it to start, just because it is much more difficult to tune in 2 nozzles as opposed to just 1. So in the beginning, just start with 1, learn the basic process, and then when you're more advanced, move on to the different kinds of supports. Whether you've got a $300 printer or a $30,000 printer, it's always going to come down to the material and the tuning process. Thanks for watching. We're going to be releasing a lot more tips, tutorials, and guides on how to print these high-performance thermoplastics, so hit subscribe, stay tuned, and we'll see you on the next video.